rin masayang kwentuhan dito sa
Alan the Generous Show.
My name is Riyya.
And my name is Alan. It has been a rough year for us because of the pandemic. And in order to help bring everyone's spirits up, let's talk about politics and economic geography today.
So, specifically, we'll be talking about public policy and political geography, public policy and economic geography, geopolitical issues in Israel and Palestine, and geopolitical issues in Asia.
And today, we have our two special guests na makakasama natin sa chikahan. Let's welcome JC and Joebhel.
Yay.
So, thank you, Riyya and Alan, for having us here.
I'm looking forward po sa chikahan natin for today.
So, welcome to our guests, and now we will start our discussion. Let's start with public policy and political geography. So first, let's define what is public policy. Public policy is best described as the broad area of government laws, regulations, court decisions, and local ordinances. So basically, this is what we follow for peace and order. Policy is also considered as the policy that officials do or do not do regarding an issue. It is also made on behalf of the public and implemented by the government. So next, we have types of public policy. First is restrictive policies, which decreases the benefits for a certain type of agreement. And in regulatory policies and practices, they target to manage different sectors of economy, while in facilitating policies, they help execute policies to encourage businesses. So for the process of public policy, we have 5. The first one is identification of the problem, formation of policy, policy adoption, implementation of policy, and evaluation of policy. Now let's move on to political geography. Political geography looks at how governments and countries are affected by their location. There are different elements in public geography that helps to determine the relationship between politics and places. So first, we have how boundaries between countries, states, and or counties are made. Second is whether the size of a country affects how powerful it is. And lastly, how the way natural resources are distributed around the world affects trade and war. Here we have Friedrich Ratzel, which is acknowledged as the father of political geography. And according to him, the connection between spatial facts and political conditions, events, and developments are studied in political geography.
So thank you, Ms. Riyya. Since public policy has already been tackled by Ms. Riyya, I'll share something about economic geography this time and its relation to the aforementioned public policy. Next. Let's start with the meaning of economic geography. Economic geography is concerned with describing and explaining the varied places and spaces in which economic activities are carried out and circulate. In relation to public policy, if economic geography and public policy is put together, we will now be focusing primarily on 3 things. Next. The first one is trade policy, the second one is tax policy, and the third one is regional policy. Next. Starting with the first focus, trade policy. Next. So trade policy defines standards, goals, rules, and regulations that pertain to trade relations between countries. So for the specifications in terms of international trade, next, we have tariffs, trade barriers, and safety, which terms that we're already familiar with. But as a review, I'll quickly define these 3. So the first one, tariff is a tax imposed by one country on the goods and services imported from another country. Trade barriers, on the other hand, are state-imposed restrictions on trading a particular product. Some of the most common forms of trade barriers are tariffs, duties, subsidies, embargoes, and quotas. The last one is safety. In here, public officials can lay down inspection regulations to ensure that the imported product conform to the set safety safety, and quality standards. Next, so there are three types of trade policy depending on the number of parties involved. This includes national trade policy, bilateral trade policy, and international trade policy. In national trade policy, every country formulates this policy to safeguard the best interests of its trade and its citizens. This policy is always in consonance with the national foreign policy. The second type of trade policy is bilateral trade policy. This policy is formed between two nations to regulate the trade and business relations with each other. For the international trade policy, in here, international economic organizations such as WTO and IMF define the international trade policy under their charter. The policies international trade policy uphold the best interests of both developed and developing nations. Next. Let's move on to the second focus in public policy and economic geography, which is tax policy. Next. Tax policy is designed to raise revenue for governments. Being a balancing act among competing objectives, taxes was said to be something that should be fair, simple, and efficient. Next. The third focus is the regional policy. Next. Regional policy is the government's policy to boost economic activity in a specific region of the country. This type of policy may include offering employers incentives to provide jobs locally, such as cheaper land and buildings. Grants, tax deductions, soft loans, and subsidized worker training are also examples of possible incentives. So that's also my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Joebhel. So let's now move on our next topic, which is geopolitical issues in Israel and Palestine. So let's start. The geography within Palestinians currently live is not the area that they claim as their own, nor are their current boundaries recognized as legitimate by others. The Palestinian requires a state that completely governs the territories in which they reside, their current government, and the Palestinian National Authority that cannot be considered representative of all Palestinians. So, the Israel is the only Jewish state in the world, and it is situated just in the east of the Mediterranean Sea. So, the Palestinians and the Israel population of the land now controlled by Israel. It is referred as the Palestine and want to establish a nation under the name on all or part of it. One of the central issues in diplomacy is how to achieve justice for the victims in a way that is acceptable for both Israelis and Palestinians. So these are the issues of Palestinian and Israeli. So the national community is worried about the stalled Israeli-Palestinian peace process and its implication for regional stability and peace. So peace between Israelis and Palestinians has eluded diplomatic efforts for the past 25 years. With this time and diplomatic efforts, it was decided that Israel will peacefully coexist with a new Palestinian state encompassing Gaza and West Bank. So let's talk about its background. Disputes over borders, resources competitions, and racial tensions strained relations between those in charge of those territories. So it becomes a battle cry for a renewed commitment to Palestinian statehoods, the defense of Palestinian rights, and bilateral dialogue. So let's talk about the recent developments of Israel and Palestine. So the past years has seen unprecedented turmoil beginning with US President Donald Trump. The Vice's decision to relocate the US Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem in December 2017. As we see here in the picture, here's the Jer and the USA and Lem, so Jerusalem. Now, the Israeli are claiming no country in this chamber would act with more restraint than Israel has. So let's talk about the risk. The fact on the ground demographic and the domestic politics with the geographical trends all suggest that continuation passage of time is eroding some of the bedrock principles that have defined the contours of two-state solution for decades, in which failure to address the conflict may force more unstable, and challenging realities of all parties. So next, let's talk about the mitigating options. The pursuit of an effective two-state solution implementing to previous existence international mechanics is one step to the global community could undertake to renew international commitment to peace. So in that case, goods should be able to move freely across the territories. In the progress, which peace process would be crucial to achieving borders peace between Israel and Arab or Islamic countries. So lastly, the problems mentioned above are serious and long-standing. That isn't to say that they can't be overcome. The participants have already overcome this problem and will do so again. So in conclusion, as a spirit of consensus and well-mediated negotiation will lead to a long-term solution. And the international community hasn't failed, however, it is possible to achieve peace.
Thank you, JC. Last but not the least, we're going to tackle about the geopolitical issues in Asia. Next slide. Technically, we're going to tackle four geopolitical issues in Asia, namely the Japan-China-Taiwan dispute on Senkaku Island, the recent China-Philippines dispute on Julian Felipe or Whitsun Reef, and the modern Silk Road, as well as the China-Sri Lanka agreement on national loans. Next slide. First, the dispute on Senkaku Island. Senkaku Island is a territory wherein the three involved countries agreed to be terra nullius, or it was not owned by any country. It was thought by China to be given to them by Japan after World War II in 1945. Japan, however, insisted that they never agreed to Senkaku Island and that it is still stateless. Later in the 1960s, Japan said it was always their island since before, and the US, led by Richard Nixon, backs the claim of Japan. Up until today, China and Taiwan are still fighting for its claims with the said island. Next slide. Another sea dispute, which has most recently brought new tensions to the geopolitical situation in Asia, is in the West Philippine Sea, as known to the Philippines, and South China Sea, as known to China. The Julian Felipe Reef, also known as the Whitsun Reef, has been the focus of the recent territorial disputes in the West Philippine Sea. Philippines claims the reef as part of the exclusive Philippine Economic Zone, while China claims the reef as China's territory for fishing and other official use. Last, the modern Silk Road and the Sri Lanka-China's agreement on national loans, because before COVID-19 pandemic, China had established a modern Silk Road, also known as their Belt and Road Initiative. So it aims to boost trade between China and many other countries, in which they agreed to strike deals with China to achieve a new trade route and diplomatic relations. China's practices of loaning large sums of money to countries such as Pakistan and Sri Lanka have largely been criticized because of the result of both countries becoming indebted to China and causing defaults on the national loans. Unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, they were given such big loan amounts that at first it was okay for the Sri Lankan government. But just a few years later, Sri Lanka told China that they cannot pay anymore. As a result, Sri Lanka can continue to build new infrastructures just like bridges, roads, and airports, but China will take full control and ownership of the port of Hambantota and the water around the port as part of China. So that's it for today. I hope you've learned a lot from our discussion. Again, my name is Kyle Magundayao.
And my name is Carlo G. Legaspi.
My name is Joebhel Mendevil.
My name is Riyya. See you next time. Bye.